It's time for
DodgerHeads. What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined tonight by special guest Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. Robinson Ortiz was traded, Fabian. We had to do an emergency podcast, so thanks for becoming available on such short notice.
What was your favorite memory of his 1 week on the 40-man roster?
It was Googling who Robinson Ortiz was immediately afterwards, and that's all I will remember Robinson Ortiz for. So Fabian is hopping on with us. He's been on multiple times. This is his first live show with us. Tons of off-season stuff to break down. In all seriousness, Fabian, it must be great to cover a team that wins the World Series, except for the part that you get literally no days off before free agency starts.
Well, especially because it's not like they do anything in the off seasons anyways. So there's that too. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's been a busy couple of years to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you hopping on. As always, we appreciate the folks joining us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, those listening via podcast after the fact. Fabian, one of the best when it comes to covering the Dodgers, obviously the beat guy for The Athletic. They do an incredible job. A whole team of people covering MLB, but Fabian's the MLB guy. Looking at the World Series real quick, Fabian, because we'll get into the offseason stuff, but I try my hardest not to move past the World Series too quickly. I did get my Yamamoto shirt today, so I had to rep that just in time. But I've gone back in the last week or so and like watched highlights of Game 7 or whatever, and I think I'm still in disbelief that this actually happened, because when I can't remember how many things I've actually forgotten about these games. Like, has it set in for you that the World Series that happened a couple weeks ago, like that actually happened?
Yeah, it was just a ridiculous series, I think, is the crazy part of it. And especially those last couple games. And the setup in Toronto is a little bit different, where their press box is not behind home plate anymore. It's like all the way in left field. And it seemed like so many of the critical plays of that series, like either involved something in left field, or the angle like that I got from left field was like super memorable. Like the play, like watching Addison Barger off second base and realizing how far off second base he was in Game 6 in real time was like very much something that I still kind of think about every once in a while. Just how crazy it is to end the game in that fashion, and then to have obviously Game 7 sort of play out the way it did. The Pages catch, Will Smith and Miguel Rojas's home runs. Yeah, it's definitely one of those series that was incredibly memorable and probably will be for a long time.
Yeah, it is interesting when you talk about that Barger play, because that's something that you have uniquely compared to everybody that watched that on TV, because obviously none of us had a view of how far he was off. Kiké catches the ball, and we're all shocked when he throws the ball back to second base and Barger's scrambling back and getting thrown out. So incredible stuff. I'm curious for you, like there were obviously big moments, big decisions. Was there kind of, and maybe it's the Barger play that you just mentioned, but was there like an underrated moment that you feel like sticks in your memory? I use for me like Muncy's home run in Game 7. I feel like is one that I hope doesn't get lost to history, because it got them within a run so that the Miguel Rojas home run could tie it. Whether it's through the postseason or the World Series particular, is there another moment that maybe doesn't pop up on like a top 5 moments list that sticks out to you?
I mean, there's a lot of like little moments. Like if this goes one little bit differently, that game's entirely different. Even like every play that Dalton Varsho made in center field was unreal. Defensively, just the range that he showed. Like, the ball that he dove for, I think, Game 7 with the bases loaded, Teo's ball. Like the fact that he dove and got to that saved not just one run but multiple runs, especially if that ball gets by him. All those balls he went and tracked down in Game 3. Like Dalton Varsho is a guy who, even when he was in Arizona, like defensively kind of stood out in center field, but he put on a masterclass in that World Series. And I think that might get forgotten a little bit just with everything else that's sort of happened with it. And I know I'm highlighting a Blue Jays player, but I think everything Dalton Varsho kind of did in that series is one of those things that like just shifted so much. Even like Dodgers people after the fact, like it seemed like every single batted ball early on in that series went Toronto's way until the last couple of games of that series when it finally started to turn the Dodgers' way. And to go back to that Barger play, like it's one of those things where in real time, like like going back and piecing what you sort of saw with what you sort of hear talking to guys after the fact, and when Kiké kind of said that he could hear the broken bat, which is why he got such a good jump on the ball. Yeah, that was one where like I was surprised at how good of a jump he got on that ball off the bat because it sort of figured that it was gonna be a ball that was gonna drop in. And it was like, all right, is he gonna be able to get the guy out at home to prevent the tying run from scoring? Let alone catching the ball as easy as he did and then doubling him off.
Yeah. It is crazy when you think about the little moments and the little things that could have shifted this series. And, look, I'm not going to say I feel bad for the Blue Jays, but I do recognize, like, I have a bunch of people who are Mariners fans. And when Suarez hits the home run in game 7 of the ALCS, it's like, oh my gosh, this guy just hit a home run that's like going to be forever, like almost like the Kirk Gibson moment for this franchise. And then they lose. And it's almost like, actually, most of these people will probably just forget that this thing ever happened. And it's kind of the same way with like the Blue Jays as a whole. You mentioned Varsho defensively, Guerrero offensively. I mean, what he did was insane. And like getting to that double even in game 7 was insane. And yet a couple of years from now, I'm not going to remember any of those things, in part because there were so many other crazy things that happened for the Dodgers that it's like, I'm going to have a hard time remembering Page's catch. I'm going to have a hard time remembering like all of the chaos that went into the 18-inning game in game 3. There were just so many insane moments from this entire run that it's almost hard to synthesize it all.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 separate Tommy Edman defensive plays in that game 3 where like the ball that went off Freddie Freeman's glove where he threw out kind of left at third base, the relay with Teo, and that sort of saved a run on that end. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of small little things. And I think for the most part, like this was a series where obviously like there were some mistakes made, like there always are, but like it seemed like the execution on both sides was just so at such a high level throughout that sort of stood out throughout the entire series.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into some offseason stuff. As always, if we've got super chats, we will get to those, and Fabian will help us answer these as well. Baseball Geek, starting us off. Do you think the Dodgers will be more active in the trade market or free agency, Fabian?
I would argue trade market, not free agency, just because of sort of where the Dodgers are at, like where they want to strike a balance. I'm sure when it comes to the future and the present with how the roster is currently constructed, and I don't know if like obviously they're always able to make every single move. Like they're definitely able to be in the market for a Kyle Tucker, but I don't know if that's necessarily the direction that they want to go in, and also the fact that they have some surpluses in certain areas, starting pitching being one, young outfield prospect depth being another. And those are 2 areas that they could probably trade from in order to help address some of those shorter term needs, whether it be reliever, whether it be a corner outfielder, whether it be sort of shoring up the lineup in a different way. So I would argue probably it's going to be more trade centric, at least as of right now in this offseason, and we'll see how the rest of the market kind of materializes. But and it's also just not the deepest or as star laden of a free agent class as it has been the last couple of years, where you saw the Dodgers spend so heavily on relievers, on Blake Snell, and then the year before, where obviously it was Ohtani, Yamamoto, and that big free agent class.
Yeah, that class I would say has worked out pretty well from a couple years ago. It feels like they spent their money wisely. Real quick on Tucker, what do you think is behind the Dodgers maybe seemingly I don't want to say lack of interest, because I'm sure there's some interest, but it doesn't feel like it's a priority. Maybe why isn't Kyle Tucker a higher priority to the Dodgers, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not gonna ever rule out like the Dodgers being in on anyone, being in on a Kyle Tucker, but I think even if they are, that's not something that's gonna materialize until very, very late in the process. Like it would have to be his market gets to a place where the Dodgers are willing to jump in. And I think part of it is because they like while they obviously can absorb financially like where things are, I don't think they want to absorb in terms of terms, in terms of years,
Okay.
clogging up that many big contracts on their roster, especially knowing how they kind of want to shift a little bit younger, acknowledging the fact that their position player group was the oldest in Major League Baseball last year. Adding another outfielder to that who's already in their 30s, building through free agency is not is obviously going to have some successes, but it's also one of those things where ideally you're not building for free agency every single year. So I think it's not necessarily anything specific about Tucker the player that's sort of scaring them off. It's more just it takes a very certain level of player, I think, to get them to keep committing that level of contract. And Otani clearly was that kind of player. I
Yeah.
think Freeman and Betts those were the guys you go out and try to acquire any chance you get. I don't know if they see. I'm not gonna say that they don't see Tucker in that range, but like I just don't see that they see that fit as pressing right now
Yeah.
as maybe the previous ones were.
Well, and I think Eno Saris, who's a colleague of yours at The Athletic, I thought his take on Kyle Tucker was really interesting, where he said, the hard part with Tucker is that like he's very good at a lot of things, but he's not really elite at anything. And I thought that was a perfect summation because I struggle in my head with like, he's a really good player. He happens to play a position, the outfield, that the Dodgers desperately need some help in, it seems like. And yet the idea of giving this guy 375, 450 million over 10 years seems crazy to me. And so ultimately when Eno said that, I was like, okay, I think that's the best summary of I don't think I could get there on 10 years for anybody that doesn't have like a elite skill. Like you've got to be on your way to the Hall of Fame, I think, for me to get to 10 years, 400 million. And Kyle Tucker, I mean, maybe, but it seems like a long shot.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like the Dodgers want to keep their go-to word is always optionality,
Yeah.
like be ready for the next guy. And part of being ready for the next big guy to be available means you don't have to jump at certain guys who might be the next guy, but aren't guys that you're necessarily saving up for in the case of an Otani, or that you aren't sort of waiting to see what Freddie Freeman's market looks like
Yeah.
after a lockout. Those types of scenarios. Like if those types of scenarios present themselves, they're going to be ready. And then you're always kind of ready to sort of jump if Kyle Tucker's market doesn't materialize quite the way that he envisioned. But I don't think, especially at this stage of the offseason, like you weren't hearing about the Dodgers being really heavy in on Freddie Freeman this time of the offseason. I think
Yeah.
is something you can sort of point to as a similar kind of case.
Yeah. One other thing on the trade piece, I've been talking about for a couple years that when I look at the Dodgers 40-man roster and when I look at the surplus of prospects that they have coming up, it has felt like to me there is a crunch coming with these guys where they're going to have to make decisions. Now, in some ways, some decisions have been made for them. Tony Gonsolin's arm goes out, and so he's gone. Michael Grove's shoulder goes out, he's gone. It feels like they moved on from Austin Barnes. Like some of these decisions have sort of opened up spaces on the 40-man. But when you say that the trade market may be more active than the free agent market, I'm curious if internally, do you think there is any pressure or sense of like, hey, we have a bunch of guys in the 30 to 40 range on our 40-man roster that like we need to cash these chips in at some point because there may not be a long-term future? Like, is that conversation happening, do you think?
I think there's some of that conversation is happening. I think also some of it's like you're trying to see, all right, how does this guy fit? Like, are you sort of penciling them in for 250 or so plate appearances? Are you trying to forecast them onto your roster sometime next year? And honestly, like the Robinson Ortiz deal is that we joked about it earlier, but like that's one of those things where you're clearing space, knowing that you're gonna have to add guys to 40 man to protect them for the Rule 5 draft coming up here in a couple of days. So like that's other stuff that's very front of mind that they're sort of keeping in mind, and they kind of have to be selective with who they kind of add and select. And they added Ryan Ward clearly because they thought they wanted to keep him in the organization, not let him be a minor league free agent. But there's also going to be situations where, like, all right, is he your solution in left field? Is he part of the solution in left field? Are there other guys who are close to the big leagues that are going to have to be in the mix, whether it be a James Tibbs or Earhart, who was also part of that Dustin May trade, who are guys who are closer to the big leagues even than a Jose De Paula or a Zaire Hope is. So, like, there's all kinds of different factors you're kind of considering at this time of the year, but I think also that crunch is definitely very real. It's just a matter of, is the right big trade happening? Is it going to be a bunch of small trades? A lot of stuff is still very much up in the air this early in the offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of to navigate all those things and to understand where the Dodgers land. You mentioned the Ryan Ward deal. When Robinson Ortiz and Ward were both added, I actually assumed that Ryan Ward, this is what was going to happen to Ryan Ward. I was like, well, they're probably just preserving the asset because there's no reason to lose it for nothing. Add him to the 40-man roster and then maybe see if you can flip him for a lottery ticket. It sounds like some of the grumblings on Ryan Ward is that they actually are believing that there's a path forward for him within the organization, which I think a lot of folks in my shoes are like, well, then why didn't they call him up at the end of last season? Like, if you believe this guy can help you in 2026 and they had nobody in left field that was contributing, why not? How have you made sense of those two decisions that seem to be telling us opposite things?
Yeah, that was the exact question I raised to Brandon Gomes at the GM meetings last week.
I
Where
was
it's
very
just
glad
like,
about that, by the way. You asked that, and I was
yeah,
like, thank you, Fabian. He's asking the questions we want answered.
yeah, because obviously, like, there's no way of saying for sure that if Ryan Ward's gonna hit the ground running and be a productive player, and also there's no saying he would have been last year or he was ready last year. But if you thought he was good enough to obviously to keep in the organization in that sort of spot, what like was there ever a conversation to call him up last year when obviously Michael Conforto wasn't working out? All the other options you were basically throwing out there, you either clearly didn't trust or didn't produce well enough. And I basically the way that Gomes responded was like, yes, they did consider it at different points, but there always just seemed to be a hurdle, whether it be a guy getting ready to come off the IL or they didn't have a 40-man spot, or they couldn't really be sure to like give him a good couple of weeks to really figure it out. Like there wasn't a Michael Conforto 2-week injury stint where he could sort of run. Obviously, they have kind of admitted that Michael Conforto's strong July played a role in them not being as aggressive at the trade deadline or being more okay with like sort of how the trade deadline sort of turned out. Was sort of banking on the strong July that Michael Conforto had. So like, there's always seemed to be a hurdle in the way, and obviously. They said that there's gonna be plenty of opportunity for Ryan Ward next season. We'll see how that kind of plays out. Obviously, things are gonna be very much subject to change, especially when it comes to their outfield and how they're kind of planning things out. But obviously, like you mentioned, this is a guy who has produced well enough that he was definitely gonna get picked up by somebody as a minor league free agent and probably given a chance to run. So the Dodgers kind of wanted to preserve that if possible.
If I only gave you these two options, either Ryan Ward is on the opening day roster for the Dodgers or he's not in the organization. Obviously, the most likely is that he's on the 40-man and he's down in Oklahoma City. But if you had to choose between more likely being on the active roster, opening day roster, or out of the organization for Ward, which one would you choose?
I would maybe lean the latter
Okay.
just because like I could see him being packaged in for something else to sort of help address the rest of the roster to help find another corner outfielder. And also I just think that they are going to try to add someone.
Yeah.
So I think the scenario where he's on the opening day roster is if they just basically say, all right, like it's Alex Call and Ryan Ward in left field. And I just don't see that being where the Dodgers wind up at the end of this offseason.
Something about Alex Call and Ryan Ward doesn't feel like it fits with the Dodgers approach and mentality of late as far as their aggressiveness. One other question before we get into a super chat we've got here. Of the smaller moves that have been made already, Ben Rortvedt, Michael Grove, Tony Gonsolin, Justin Dean, all out of the organization. Now Robinson Ortiz joining that group. Ryan Ward added. Did any of those kind of surprise you at all?
I think the Ward one did a little bit just because, like, all right, for all the reasons we kind of hit on. But, like, obviously, at the end of the day, like, this is a guy who produced in AAA. Like, you can think about, obviously, his long term fit or defensively what the concerns are, or acknowledge the fact that, like, there has probably never been a bigger gap between the big leagues and AAA in terms of quality. So, like, that's probably skewing some of the numbers. Like, you can think through all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, someone was going to look at those numbers and sort of give them a shot. Uh, Either on a minor league deal or even possibly on a big league deal, just to give him say, hey, left field, like we're gonna give you a couple months just to figure it out. Like let's see it. So I think in retrospect, like maybe not as surprising, but I think that name was probably the one that over the course of last week, like that was the most surprised I was when sort of hearing that he'd been added to the 40 man.
Yeah, it seemed like everybody had just written off, like, this will be his last year in the organization. He'll be a free agent. But again, the Dodgers surprise on that front. Rosemary with the super chat here. Do you think, Fabian, there is more urgency in the outfield or in the bullpen for the Dodgers?
I think in terms of like going out and adding, I would probably still say the outfield. I think the bullpen, they understand like that the group did not produce, that they probably are looking to add another guy. Obviously, Devin Williams, the guy I wrote about last week. Raisel Iglesias is another name that makes a ton of sense, who they've been linked to in free agency. We'll see if they can find a rabbit out of their hat when it comes to a reliever, sort of like an Alex Vesia discovery from 5 years ago. Like finding those types of guys, like they will find ways to like add a few interesting relievers that you're not kind of expecting. But I think in terms of like their bigger name pursuits, I wouldn't be surprised if it's more on the trade front for an outfielder.
So on the outfield trade front, there's kind of three major names that we've talked about. And I would say one of these the Dodgers have been linked to. One is sort of quote unquote newly on the market. And the third is just one that I keep talking about because on paper it makes so much sense. Those three names are Steven Kwan, a guy that it sounds like the Dodgers very nearly maybe thought they had acquired at the trade deadline. They did not. Byron Buxton is a name that is now out there that just I look at and I'm like, this feels like the most Dodgers player ever, in that he doesn't play all the time, but the ceiling is really, really high and everybody seems to love him in the clubhouse. And then maybe in some ways the opposite of that is a guy like Jarren Duran over in Boston, who just feels like he's not going to be in a Red Sox. He feels like he's available. The Red Sox need pitching. So of those three names, as far as trade candidates go, do any of those intrigue you personally for the Dodgers?
Kwan's obviously really intriguing. That's a guy that the Dodgers have been like really heavy in on for a long time, and they were at the deadline up until like the last hour or so at the deadline before they kind of had to pivot. They were trying to get something done there. They didn't. Cleveland is very difficult to negotiate with. I think that's something that our Andy McCullough kind of wrote about going into the deadline. Like they called him the Cleveland grind machine, is what other executives have called him, just because of how much they try to seek and add like premium value whenever they can. And the Dodgers are pretty tough negotiators too. So like that makes for a pretty difficult transaction. Buxton, it's interesting because obviously he's a guy who like you mentioned, the highest upside available. The thing is, he does have a no trade clause, so like even if he does wind up being in rumors this winter, does wind up being on the move, it's probably going to be to his desired destination. So like we don't know what those desired destinations would be. Obviously, he's a guy who's from Atlanta. Does he want to go play for the Braves? Does he want to go? Does he want to ensure that he's on a winner? Like obviously that would help the Dodgers case. So like there's so much that's unknown when it comes to a no trade clause, and the Dodgers haven't really dealt with too many guys who have those. Obviously, there's a couple of notable cases like Eduardo Rodriguez. Lance Lynn had a no trade clause, and he waived that to be a Dodger. But so there are obviously a couple of those cases that come to mind. And Buxton's a lot of it depends on, first off, are the Twins going to be open to trading him? To, if so, like where does he want to go? And then with Duran, yeah, like I think the Red Sox. I would not be surprised if the Red Sox trade an outfielder. I think the two teams that, the three teams probably that are most likely to move an outfielder, I would guess, are going to be the Red Sox, the Angels, and even the Cardinals. So I think the Red Sox probably could move an outfielder, whether it be a Duran. I think Willie Abreu is just a really good player. I think that's one of those guys that kind of gets underappreciated how good the glove is, and he's a good left-handed bat, and like that'd be really interesting on that front as well. And another name that the Dodgers kind of been linked to in the past that I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of are connected to again is Brendan Donovan, who it seems like every single team is kind of connected on Brendan Donovan, but he is that type of guy who can play some left field, obviously can play some infield too, so maybe that helps the Dodgers a little bit, but a good quality left-handed bat. And the last time the Dodgers traded for a Cardinals utility man, it turned out all right.
Yeah. Is there any, besides Kwan, are you hearing anything about these guys? Like, are there links between the Dodgers and Abreu or Duran in Boston or Donovan in St. Louis? Or are these just like internet rumors of people like me connecting dots and saying, oh, this guy's available and the Dodgers could use him, so maybe there's a fit?
I haven't heard too much, mostly just 'cause, like everything at this stage is like so like cursory. Like, it's more just like all right, gauging levels of interest and stuff like that. So like I'm sure the Dodgers have connected on most, if not all, of those fronts,
Yeah.
just to sort of gauge interest and gauge what markets are and stuff like that. Like, and there's obviously a huge difference between like guys like you're sort of just gauging an interest or calling on guys. Like everyone in baseball basically gets called on. But that and difference between that and like actual like you're trying to get a deal done. That it's still very early in the offseason for that sort of stuff.
I got in trouble with some of my coworkers because I started to imagine the narrative of Mike Trout somehow finding his way to the Dodgers. I'm like, can you imagine what a great story it would be? Trout kind of revives his career a little bit, finally gets to win with his buddy Ohtani. People weren't too happy about that. Besides the fact that it sounds like everybody believes Artie Moreno will never trade with the Dodgers. So there's that also. But I mean, Taylor Ward, you mentioned the Angels. Like, they do have a handful of outfielders. Some of them make way more sense than others. But like, do you think you covered the Angels? Is there any chance the Angels would trade with the Dodgers?
I think the odds of that would be very slim. I'll
Okay.
just say that just because of how, like, obviously you can't really predict anything with Artie Moreno, but I think being spiteful towards the Dodgers is one of those things that usually you can bank on with him.
Yeah. Speaking of the Angels, by the way, Andy Pages was supposed to be in that trade, and again, things that worked out for the Dodgers. Real quick on the outfield before we shift to the bullpen. Some of the other names. Is Dalton Rushing going to play some outfield this year? Do we think?
I think Brandon Gomes left that door open. I still be very surprised if that happened.
Okay.
I think that it's going to be backup catcher. It did sound like they're going to try to see if maybe Freddie Freeman's more open to getting a few more days off than usual this coming year, so that would open up some first base. But like defensively, I just don't see it with Dalton Rushing in left field. It doesn't seem like they're very high on him there.
Do we think he's better or worse than Gavin Lux in left field, defensively purely?
I haven't seen Dalton Rushing run headfirst into walls, so we'll see. But I do think that like that the funny thing about that Gavin Lux catch he had, which I think not even catch the ball where he like crashed into the wall. I think he was in center field.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like this I remember watching that play in real time. I was like, wow, he's covering a lot of ground. This is the first time I really could see him in center, and then immediately ran into the wall. So like that was probably the end of it.
Okay, externally, are there sleeper names out there? Are there like plan B names of guys where it's like, hey, if they can't go get a Steven Kwan type, like are they swimming in the Harrison Bader market? Are they swimming in a pool that's below the Harrison Bader market?
I think Bader would make some sense. Although obviously, like, does seem like he probably would get a multi-year deal. I don't know if the Dodgers would do that. I do think that it's one of those things like where they're always going to kind of be willing to, especially for like, the thing with the Conforto deal is like, yes, it turned out very poorly. He was not a very productive player, and they didn't cut bait when he was kind of scuffling. But like for the most part, like if there's any team that can absorb a bad 1 year deal like that, which the Dodgers basically wound up paying like 40 million or whatever for a 1 year deal if you include the tax and everything like that, it's the Dodgers. That's like what they're set up to kind of do. Yeah, I think maybe like they'll be open to that, but other than that, I don't think they'd be trying to go for a multi-year commitment for an outfielder. I would be surprised by that.
Internally, are there any names of guys? I mean, all the top guys feel like they're still another 18 months away. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. You mentioned Zach Earhart's name earlier in this, and that's not a name I've heard linked as like a guy that could be in play in 2026. I don't know if that was just a name that popped into your head or a name that you're hearing. Are there names internally of like, hey, you never know, this guy could be in the mix at some point this season?
Yeah, I mean, asking like, around like who are the guys who are like the most like the closest to big league ready in the outfield. I think the two names that came up a few times were Tibbs and Earhart. So like I think those are the two guys who happen to be in the same trade, but like might turn out working out well for the Dodgers in terms of getting some immediate like outfield coverage for Dustin May. So
I don't know these teams that trade with the Dodgers. When the Dodgers start asking for particular players, like this guy they just got in the Robinson Ortiz trade, I'm like reading up on him, and it's like he's a high school kid, 9th rounder in 2022, missed all of last year from Tommy John. Like I just think if the Dodgers called me and were like, "Hey, we would take that guy off of your hands," like I think I would just be terrified immediately because they trade for these two guys from Boston, and then immediately it's like, "Oh yeah, that's why James Tibbs was a first round draft pick and everybody loved him." So the Dodgers. We know this being sort of connected to this team and following this team and knowing how they work inside. But man, the way they pull off these trades, like a Dustin May trade, is pretty remarkable. The guys that they're able to unearth.
yeah, I think obviously like that was one of the in the moment where you weren't sure what value the Dodgers would be able to get for Dustin May. Obviously, like they were in a spot where they kind of were inclined to trade him, especially to a place where he could start. So that kind of like limited the options. The Red Sox clearly wanted to fill some innings. Although they sort of cut Walker Buehler shortly after Dustin May got there, and then Dustin May got hurt shortly thereafter. Although, like obviously, like he's still an intriguing enough piece. Like I kind of heard like there's a lot of teams that are kind of still calling on Dustin May as a starter, and I'm sure that there's some scenarios where he would fit on a short-term deal, trying to harness some of the stuff that he used to have pre-surgery and try to see what his stuff can do now. So he's still an interesting piece. So like I think that's part of why the Dodgers are kind of able to get what they were able to get, and also part of it's at the trade deadline. That's part of why Andrew Friedman's whole thing is like the prices are never higher than in the middle
Yeah.
than in late July, and I think that's kind of an example of that.
Hawaiian Kira's got a super chat. Aloha, Fabian. What is your opinion on the Japanese players available? We had Jim Allen on our show talking about Murakami and his kind of personal view and talking to scouts of where he fits in Major League Baseball and if the Dodgers in particular. He didn't see a fit with the Dodgers positionally, which it seems like a common theme. But do you think the Dodgers will be in on any of the Japanese players?
I'd be a little surprised, mostly just because the positional fits. Like Murakami is kind of blocked at first base and third base. As much as like Imai is a really interesting arm, like the Dodgers definitely have a lot of starting pitching depth, and I don't know
Yeah.
if they necessarily want to lock in another guaranteed rotation spot when they're already kind of just trying to figure out how these pieces work. So like I haven't honestly dug in too much on those guys just because like I haven't seen them or heard them as real like Dodger fits at this time.
Okay. Jamie, we appreciate the super chat. Adam asks, are there any free agents on the market that you see the Dodgers realistically pursuing? This is probably a question I would imagine that maybe shifts us towards the relief pitcher market because it feels like that's where there is 7 or 8 guys that seem to check at least some of the boxes the Dodgers are looking for. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, although obviously it's all price dependent. I think it's
Yeah.
part of it. Like the relief market seems to be the market that has the most activity at the moment, has the most options, is the deepest in this class, and that's why like you've seen the Dodgers kind of connected to a few of these guys like Devin Williams, Raisel Iglesias. But I think those guys kind of make more sense than maybe kind of the Edwin Diaz's of the world, just because I'm sure they, as much as they can kind of go chase after the money that they spent on relievers last winter. I do think there's part of them that's like, all right, yes, but maybe on a 1 or 2 year deal as opposed to on the kind of 4 year deal that they did with Tanner Scott last October or last winter.
Yeah. Real quick, Jamie had a super chat. He or she forgot to put the question. Will Freddie Freeman end his career in LA? Was the question.
I think it depends on where things kind of stand in 3 years or so, whenever that contract expires. I wouldn't be surprised if he still feels like he can keep going after that's done, especially like it depends on how close he is to 3,000 hits.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it's a matter of like, all right, does he want to go back to Atlanta? Does he want to close out his career where he kind of has spent the last few years and been productive? And if so, like what's the fit? What do the Dodgers kind of want to do at first base at that point? Is that a point in time where you're considering shifting Will Smith over to first base? Uh, I think as of right now, I think he plays out beyond this contract, and I think where that is, I think ultimately depends on where kind of probably Atlanta and the Dodgers stand each individually as teams and what they kind of want to do. Because I'd imagine those are the two teams he would like to play for. I don't want to speak for him, so obviously like, we'll see what the market kind of plays out. But I think he would probably would want to keep playing, especially if he's close to 3,000 hits.
Well, and I was going to say that 3,000 hits seems like it's a thing that's important to him. And you mentioned they may ask him to take a few extra days off this year, and that they could make the case, hey, long term, this is actually going to allow you to play more games over the course of your career, not less. But I am curious how that conversation might go with him, because while he is a team player, he also values playing every day. And I think he wants to get to 3,000 hits, and every day you sit out is a potential 2 or 3 hits that you may miss out on.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be part of the negotiation with him on a daily basis, of like the conversation, push and pull, and understanding. I think also there's some of him that understands like that his body's not at the same point where it was even like midway through 2024. It's just considering like the toll that ankle had on him, and some of the other lingering stuff that happened, and just understanding what it's going to take for him to stay on the field. And you sort of saw him. I mean, he's shifted his pregame work a little bit, even from how it was beforehand, just kind of acknowledging that like, hey, there's gonna be some things that he's gonna have to do differently, sort of keep the level of production that he wants. So it's gonna be probably some push and pull, and I think I'm sure there's gonna be some stuff that's said in the off season that'll be a lot harder to kind of enforce
Yeah.
in April, May, or June when it comes to like asking for days off and stuff like that.
I want to go back to the relief pitcher conversation real quick. Last year, Andrew Friedman did a thing that he seems to not ever want to do, which is pay money for a relief pitcher in Tanner Scott. He also paid money for Kirby Yates, although that was a 1 year deal. Although, like the Conforto deal, it's like multiply it by 2.5 or whatever, because that's what it actually cost them to sign Kirby Yates. Both of those did not go well. I know Andrew Friedman is not a simplistic thinker like somebody like I am, where it's like, oh, did hard thing, it was bad, we'll never do hard thing again. But I have to imagine it's floating around in the back of his mind a little bit when he looks at this free agent market and says, I did the thing I hate doing last year, and it went the exact way I was afraid it was going to go. Do you think that is going to change their approach at all when it comes to the guys they target?
I think it approach changes some of the approach for sure, and at least like the willingness, like to dive into the deepest end. Because I think part of like why they didn't do that for years is because they know that these free agent deals for relievers don't usually work out. And one of those things I included in that story, which is like some people read that as like a criticism of Diaz or Josh Hader. It wasn't. It's more just kind of like a realistic fact. Like the guys who sign these deals, like I mean, these deals don't necessarily guarantee you're going to win, anyways.
Yeah.
The three guys with the richest relief pitching contracts in baseball last year combined to throw 0 pitches in the postseason last year between Diaz, Josh Hader, and Tanner Scott. So it's one of those things where like it's tough to really kind of wade into that market that heavily unless you're certain about the guy. And I think the Dodgers were kind of betting on Tanner Scott stuff wise being the guy. And in a lot of ways, the stuff is still kind of the same. And I think they were kind of still banking on a bounce back there. That it's gonna have to be better than it was last year. And I mean it's hard to find it to be worse than it was last year. Obviously, he stayed healthy for the most part, which worked out well for the Dodgers, but they still are kind of in a spot where they're kind of going to give him a lot of chances probably in the ninth inning as currently constructed, but they are still going to be kind of waiting in that free agent market. I just don't see it for a mega deal. I'm sure that if they can sort of come together on something, a little bounce back deal for Devin Williams or kind of riding it out with Raisel Iglesias, who's towards the end of his career but still pretty productive. I think those are ones that maybe fit the Dodgers a little bit better.
Yeah, Williams is the one that when I did a deep dive last week on our show, I just was really impressed by, because it feels like the Dodgers move in the sense that like the external metrics are all kind of a mess from last year, and yet when you dive underneath the hood a little bit on him, there's a lot to like. I know you've reported that he's a clear target, and then he has said he thought he was going to end up a Dodger last year before he ended up getting traded to the Yankees. But this is a guy that going back to 2020 had been one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball every single year. And again, even last year, if you look at some of the StatCast stuff underneath the hood, whiff rate, strikeout rate, all of that, like it's still elite. So when I see his number coming in, I mean, the two projections, trade rumors had him projected at a 4-year, $68 million deal. And Tim Britton at The Athletic, who I think does a fantastic job, predicted a 1-year, $18 million deal. So it goes to show you how wide the range of outcomes might be for him. But both of those are at 20 million less than Edwin Diaz, not to mention they don't come with a qualifying offer. So to me, Devin Williams feels like a perfect fit for what the Dodgers are trying to do as a right-handed guy who has the potential to be a real difference maker, they're not looking for depth arms, right? Like they're looking for a guy that is going to be able to get you 4 outs in the World Series and you're going to feel good about it.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers would rather do the Britton projection than the MLB
Yes.
trade rumors projection. But I think part of it's like I think a lot of teams are going to see him in that way too. Is the thing that might push him out of the Dodgers' sort of desired market, just because like every team kind of recognizes like this is a guy to bounce back in on. Like he's a guy who has a pretty active market. Like even some surprising teams that kind of reach out to him, just kind of knowing that like, this is a guy that this is the right time to strike when it comes to Devin Williams. So I'm sure there's be other teams are in the mix there, but yeah, like the Dodgers are looking for potential impact because I think they know that they've had a good track record and success rate when it comes to finding guys, even a guy like Will Klein, or also guys in the past like an Alex Vesia or an Evan Phillips, or being able to go out and trade for Michael Kopech. Just sort of understanding that you can sort of find higher upside guys elsewhere on the market for less. But if there is a guy who sort of fits their range, but who also has a little bit more of that track record, it certainly makes the decision about the ninth inning a little bit easier, especially, I mean, for Williams' specific case, like he's a guy who's thrown the eighth and ninth and been successful. So that's something that's helpful when mapping out ideally what this bullpen looks like around Tanner Scott, Blake Trinan, and the guys who they have come back.
Let's talk Iglesias real quick. You mentioned like he's been productive. I looked at his, just looking at ERA, 3.2 is the highest ERA he's had in the last 5 years. The other 4 years, all under 3. The underlying stuff, chase rate, whiff rate, expected ERA, hard hit rate, all 88th percentile or higher this past year. And yet he's 35 years old. The velocity is starting to dip. So when I dove into him, and again, the projections are like 2 years, $25 million, I think was the average. He seems to worry me a little bit because it feels like you might be staring down the next Kirby Yates where the cliff is coming and you don't want to pay the man right before the cliff comes. Is there a part of Iglesias in particular that you've either heard from people within the Dodgers or even just you personally that kind of maybe eases some of those concerns?
I think that a lot of the numbers actually were kind of from early on in the season where he was having a lot of trouble keeping the ball at the ballpark. Obviously, people remember the walk-off that Shohei Ohtani hit off him that first week of the season. I think that played a lot into like the numbers maybe not being as good over the course of the season. But you're right, like the velocity did go down. The fact that the home runs did go up is probably some reason for concern. But he did finish strong. I think that's
Yeah.
one of those things where like teams will bet on a smaller sample on a reliever just because they know that, especially if they know that he can get the swing and miss, which he still was able to do even when he was struggling.
Okay. I like it. Internally, Ben Kasparius, Justin Robleski, maybe Kyle Hurd, another guy. Like, do you think those three guys are headed for the bullpen as a semi-permanent home, or do you think any of those three is still going to get a chance to be a starter in the organization?
I'd imagine at least Kasparius and Robleski show up to spring training stretched out to start, but like just because it makes the most sense, like your most value on guys is going to be with them as
Yeah.
starters, and even if you wind up moving one of them or needing one of them to plug in early as a spot starter and stuff like that, like it just makes the most sense to at least start them in those roles and then shorten them up. But I'd imagine all three of those guys play a role in the bullpen over the course of this year.
What can you tell us about the rehab appearance, the rehab and sort of where these guys are at when it comes to River Ryan and Gavin Stone? We'll start with River Ryan. I mean, talk about like electricity and the ceiling that is nuts for a guy they acquired in another one of these like trades, ironically, for Matt Beatty from San Diego. Shout out to the Padres. But how is he coming back from his injury and what are the expectations for him as at spring training?
Yeah, I think the plan is for both those guys really to be ready or close-ish to ready at the start of spring training, and then we'll see like what if there's any workload restrictions that kind of come up along the way. But it does seem like those two are two guys who'll be ready from the start if needed. I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, with the Dodgers, they always kind of slow play guy or sort of like delay his start if they sort of see that everyone else is kind of healthy in a good spot. But like those are two guys who it seems like by all indications, those are guys that are going to be close to full seasons as of right now.
Gavin Stone is just a guy that I haven't heard anything about. When I got a chance to talk to him at spring training last year, I think it was the first time that it was like publicly announced he basically had his entire shoulder taken apart. And I just haven't heard anything. Should I be at all concerned about not having heard anything about Gavin Stone?
I think it's just one of those things where like you don't know until like a guy's on the mound, especially when
Okay.
it comes to a shoulder. Like honestly, shoulders are one of those things that like are trickier to come back from at this point than elbows even are, just because, especially with the surgery like Stone. So we'll see what it kind of looks like, how he can kind of ramp up. Like obviously, and it's not this, it's apples to oranges, but like Brusdar, Gratterall coming off the
Yep.
shoulder, like it's one of those things where sometimes you're not able to put your foot on the gas until like much later than anticipated. So we'll see. Like with Gratterall's case was the case where he was building up, building up, building up, and then hitting kind of a wall when it comes to being able to like hit the gas with his shoulder. So we'll see how it comes to the later stages of his rehab. But as of right now, like everything's kind of somewhat positive indications from Gavin Stone.
Love it. Two more questions for me, and then we're going to open up about 10 or 15 minutes of questions from the folks in here. Again, thanks to everybody hopping on live with us. This is Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. I have joked on our show that because the Dodgers won the World Series in 2025, a year in which Shohei Ohtani and basically Blake Snell didn't pitch until like August, essentially. And then Tyler Glasnow kind of got slow played, and Yamamoto's the only guy that pitched the full season. Is there a chance that the Dodgers look at the Justin Robleskis and the River Ryans and the Gavin Stones and the Emmett Sheehans of the world, and they're like, you guys figure this out until about the middle of July, and then we'll start warming up these horses that realistically there's real injury concern about whether or not Blake Snell can throw as many innings as Yamamoto did, or Glasnow can, or even Ohtani can. Like, do you think this is going to become a thing where the Dodgers put these guys on ice for the beginning of the year?
I don't think necessarily in that way, but I think it's gonna be one of those things where like with these guys, if you feel something, say something type thing. Like
Yeah.
just that they're more willing to put guys on ice in the middle of the season, but I don't think they want to tell guys like, hey, like don't have a normal spring, especially for a guy like Snell who has sort of gone through it before and like not had a normal spring and had a weird year as a result of that. Also, like I mean, there's just some of these guys where the huge kind of want to give guys as close to normal as possible, and if they say something, don't push it, because
Yeah.
that October is kind of in mind. But like Otani's already on record saying like he wants to have a full season pitching wise. Uh, I think the one guy like that I try to be mindful of if you can is Yamamoto, but like
Yeah.
you just don't know what he wants to do, what his goals are. Obviously, there's the possibility of the WBC lingering over with Yamamoto and Otani and Sasaki and some of these other guys, like what that matters, what that means for their workloads, what their WPC is going to kind of look like. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that, but I think at the outset, like if all five or all six of those guys are healthy at the outset, like I think they're going to try to have those guys be starting and in the rotation.
Okay. Kiké Hernández has indicated he would like to return to the Dodgers. We know that it's been recently reported by you, among others, that he had surgery. Do you think Kiké Hernández is back with the Dodgers next year?
I think we'll see. It's like one of those things where, like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's back at all. And same thing with Miguel Rojas. I think the Dodgers just kind of have to figure out like what the rest of the roster kind of looks like and what the fit is for their bench, because I think they kind of acknowledge that last year's bench construction wasn't ideal, and some of it obviously worked out. But like I think being in a spot where they were in last October, where some of their bench options weren't. Uh, they didn't quite fit all together where you're like they were really right-handed on their bench. Their best left-handed bench bat for some of October was Dalton Rushing. Like I don't think that's a spot they necessarily want to be in again.
Yeah.
But I think they are also acknowledge that like having Kiké Hernandez around, having Miguel Rojas around has been very helpful, and it's one of the things that would be very helpful going forward. And they are a big part of building the kind of culture that they kind of credited for them winning this World Series despite not playing well for much of that World Series.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to some questions. All caps questions in the chat. If you want to drop those in there, we got a couple super chats and then we'll get to some more. We got about 10 minutes left. Ivan asks, isn't this the offseason to spend considering the possibility of a lockout in 26? Lock in the current rules and rates. Are there any players or teams to target from teams losing money? This lockout narrative has been a big one. It seems like most people in Major League Baseball have said like, it's unlikely to happen, so just move ahead, business as usual. Is that the sense that you're getting from, you were obviously at the GM meetings?
I get the sense like it seems like a lot of these teams are at least saying that they're more aggressive this offseason than in past years. So I think that kind of floods the market a little bit. And I also think that logic makes some sense if this were a deeper free agent class. Like if this was last year's free agent class, if this was 2 years ago free agent class for sure, like these would be situations where yeah, absolutely go all in, like go out and sign a Juan Soto because who knows, like that, like especially if he wants to do that. But like to sort of stretch yourself and possibly be on the other side of it, where obviously they would if they sort of make major changes, those would all be scaled, but like those would still be things that kind of hamper you after the lockout. So like you're kind of like trying to plan with that in mind. And also if you're the Dodgers, you're kind of still operating from the position of strength. And especially with how like aggressive some of these teams seem to be in free agency, it's going to probably leave some interesting opportunities on the trade market for some of the teams that are clearly looking to move different parts of their roster.
All right. Sean asks, is San Diego going to sell its team? And is Tatis a possibility? Or is that too much star power on one team and the league would intervene? Do you want to answer the Tatis question or do you want me to answer that question, Fabian?
I don't think he's going anywhere, period, let alone to the Dodgers. At least not anytime soon. I don't see why an owner would buy the team looking to trade Tatis.
Yeah. What I mean, I know the Athletic has done a bunch of reporting about this, that the Padres are exploring the possibility of selling the team. It seems like that's kind of all we know at this point. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's still very much early in stages. I mean, they're kind of like trying to see if they can take on minority partners, let alone sell the team. And we saw this with the Twins recently. We saw this with the Angels recently, and neither time the team changed hands. Like the Twins, I think, sold some minority stakes, but I don't even think the Angels even sold minority stakes. They just took the team off the market. So it's one of those things where it's exploratory. Obviously, that ownership group has had a lot of turmoil recently, especially in the wake of Peter Seidler's passing and like that whole family drama. So I think part of that is kind of trying to clear up some of that family drama, and we'll see how long that process takes and what shape that sort of takes.
Fabian, I'm going to warn you, by the way, that we tend to get into some food conversations towards the end of our shows. So I'm sure you're prepared. You'll be able to handle this. I just want you to know that that's coming your way in a little bit. Couple more baseball questions first. Jeff, not me, wants to know, do you think Kenley Jansen is an option for the Dodgers?
I think on paper he makes sense. I obviously like Kenley speaks very highly of his time with the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers speak very highly of Kenley. There's obviously history there, and I don't know if like it might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing, but I think the fact that like he obviously was so tied to the ninth inning in LA is possibly a factor, and he's a guy who's very clearly like he wants to go out and get saves. And I don't think that's the way the Dodgers necessarily want to construct their pen, so possibly, but I would still be surprised if that happened.
TQT says Teoscar Hernandez is a designated hitter now, but we employ a guy named Shohei. Is there any chance that Teoscar Hernandez gets moved this winter?
I would be surprised at that at this point. Like obviously, maybe things would be different if the Dodgers had lost the World Series or lost earlier in the series. They kind of wanted to shake something up, but I just think that you're looking at he was probably your second best hitter this October, and he probably was the year before that as well. And he's a guy who's an October performer, and obviously the defense is an issue. I think they're kind of everyone kind of recognizes it's a major issue. They say that his defense improved the last couple of months of the season, but it's still a spot where like you kind of know that you're trading in whatever runs he gives up, and he's going to drive in the runs, kind of make up for it. And as long as that balance is struck, like he's still a guy who fits as a net positive for the roster.
Hawaiian Kira wants to know, who is your all-time favorite baseball player? I know you're an Arizona guy, so not to sort of publicly out this, but I assume you were a Diamondbacks fan growing up? No.
I was not. I grew up actually a St. Louis Cardinals fan because when my brother was like 20 plus years older than me, and that was my way to connect with him, and he spent some of his childhood in St. Louis. And my favorite player growing up was actually Albert Pujols. So that was
I think I heard this.
That was interesting getting to cover him in Anaheim and in LA. So
okay. Do you have a favorite Dodger? I guess maybe it's the same answer. Is Albert Pujols your favorite Dodger of all time?
I guess so, because of the memorable 2021 season he had in the 55 jersey.
I love it. Ederico asks, who do you think the young pitcher is that is most likely to become the regular fifth starter? I think the obvious choice here is Emmett Sheehan because how impressive he was. But do you think there's anybody that's going to make a serious push for that spot?
I think it's Emmett Sheehan just because, like, obviously we've seen what it looked like coming off surgery and the way, like, how impressive he was even pre-surgery, but obviously the fact he was able to recapture that form and look even better than he did in his first taste of the big leagues is really impressive, especially considering how shortly removed he is from surgery. And I think he's one of those guys where, like, even when he was first coming up, like Clayton Kershaw kind of pointed to him as like being like that. That's the kind of guy from this group that kind of stands out the most.
Of the next group, Roki Sasaki, River Ryan, Gavin Stone, Justin Robleski, Ben Kasperius, Jackson Ferris. Is there a guy in that group that if you had to pick somebody that kind of opens some eyes at spring training and makes a jump, maybe let's just say the first half, because some of these guys are coming back, but if one of those six guys kind of emerges at some point in the first half of this season, who would you predict that it would be?
I mean, it's hard to go against Roki Sasaki just because, like, that's the kind of talent he is. Like, who knows, like, if he can hold his, like, if they get into a spot where he holds the velocity really well as a starter, and that the cutter that he's developed is all of a sudden really viable for their pitch, like, then all of a sudden you kind of have to remove whatever the ceiling is on him. So I would say him, and then obviously, like, it was 4 big league starts before he blew out, but, like, River Ryan was really, really impressive before he got hurt. And, like, this was a guy who probably was going to start game 1 or something close to it. Like, it was going to start a really competitive postseason game for the really important postseason game for the Dodgers had he not gotten hurt. So, like, this is it's hard to kind of ignore what you saw in those 4 starts, even while acknowledging it was a very, very small sample.
Ella Shiva asks, isn't it likely that Andrew Friedman will make a move that nobody expects? Is there an off the radar name that you want to just throw out into the universe, Fabian, as a name that the Dodgers might end up with?
I don't know if necessarily like an off the radar name, but like I wouldn't be surprised if they're kind of connected to just about every outfielder that is possibly moved. Like I think Willie Abreu. I mentioned him earlier, but like, that's a guy who's just like a really good player that I don't
Yeah.
think enough people like really recognize like how good he is just because of how many outfielders they have in Boston. But like that is a guy who every person that I've like sort of talked to who's been around him like speaks really highly on the guy, but also like that's just a really good player.
Yeah. And it feels like those are the types of players where the Dodgers, it's like, okay, if we can go get like a B plus type player, or we can slightly overpay to go get like an A level player, it feels like they're willing to overpay to go get a guy that's maybe a notch up or has less holes, less concerns. So, anyways, I like it. I like it. Okay, we've got, I think, 3 food questions for you here. Dong says, first of all, he says, thank you, Fabian, for your great articles, but he wants to know your take on almond joys. I said almond joys were disgusting recently, and apparently this did make some people happy. So do you have any opinions on almond joys?
I'm super indifferent on them. Like I think
Okay.
almonds are fine, and like I don't mind coconut. So sure.
What's your go-to Halloween candy? Stephen Nelson was sort of the genesis of this question, but do you have a go-to?
I've been high on the Nerds gummy clusters the last couple years.
Yes. Fabian, let's go. I think that's the
Yeah,
greatest candy ever created.
yeah.
It's unbelievable. So Stephen got people fired up because he said Reese's Pieces over Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. People were taken
Okay.
aback by that. Jake wants to know, is In-N-Out overrated?
Absolutely not.
Good answer. What's your In-N-Out go-to order?
3x3 with onion, and then animal salad fry.
Love that. Love that. David wants to know, what does Fabian like to eat on football Sundays? I know you're a college football guy too, so maybe this is football Saturdays, but do you have like a tailgating type meal?
I don't have like a go-to. Like I'm not picky when it comes to like tailgate food. Like I'll eat whatever's available on the spread, or I'll make something, or whatever we have at the house and stuff like that. We do have a tradition every Sunday where we go to our favorite donut spot and like pick out a donut before the games kick off. But like, that's the one thing that we kind of do.
Okay, well, you know what my follow-up question is going to be now, Fabian. What kind of donut is Fabian Ardaya picking out when he goes to the donut shop?
It depends on the day, but today I went maple bar.
Okay. All right. All right. So you mix it up though. You pick a different
Yeah,
kind of
I
donut?
mix it up. My wife does maple bar every time.
Yeah, I'm a don't mess with a good thing. I'm an apple fritter guy. But Victor wants to know, tacos or tortas?
Tacos.
Okay. Yeah, you've got good food down in down where you're at, which I love. Okay. I don't know if I've asked you. I'm apologizing if I have. My go-to food question, and this will send you out on, is, have I asked you my convenience store question?
No, you haven't.
Okay, this is great. So the convenience store question is, you're going on a road trip and you go in and you pick 3 things. It's a drink, it's a snack, something salty, and then something sweet. And you can imagine whatever type of convenience store you want. They are selling whatever you want to justify as a convenience store item. So what drink are you coming out with? What salty, snacky type thing are you coming out with? And what sweet are you coming out with?
I'll start with the sweet. I'll just go gummy clusters because
Great choice.
we're in it like that. I feel like I'm not a huge salty guy, but like um, I'll do Cool Ranch Doritos,
It's great.
and then I don't want to be boring and just say water. Like I think I didn't get into Celsius until this postseason run. I probably shouldn't keep drinking them. So, but I will go with that for a road trip because I have to stay awake.
There you go. I love it. I love it. That is
Yeah.
Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. You can find his stuff there. Fabian, anything you want to plug over at The Athletic pieces you got coming out this week?
Just read the Athletic. I don't really have anything particular to plug.
Awesome. Well, I will say it is the best coverage out there is the Dodgers as far as I'm concerned, because not only do you get Fabian, but then you've got pieces from Andy McCullough, Ken Rosenthal, the whole national team as well. So incredible stuff. If you're not already subscribing, I was always like in my head an anti like paying for anything because there was so much free stuff. I am not saying this because you were here. I have never once regretted paying for The Athletic. It's the best coverage of all of the teams that I root for. And so I appreciate all the stuff that you guys have going on. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time on Sunday night, Fabian. Hopefully you get like a small break in the next, I don't know, whatever we're at, 94 days until spring training or something like that. And you can enjoy a little bit of downtime.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yeah. We appreciate everyone for watching. Again, that is Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. I am Jeff Spiegel. If you are new, please subscribe, ring the notification bell, check out the DodgerHeads podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Enjoy the rest of your night, everyone. As always, go Dodgers. And yes, still champs.